just going to go spruce up the stock photo a little bit. Welcome back to my stock photo of a den. Last time we were here, I talked about the olden days of cooperative games, from ancient sports to Victorian parlor games, to 1930s mysteries, to 1970s parents promoting peaceful modes of play. I provided this chart of definitions to denote what I'm calling competition games, to keep them separate from puzzles and challenges and activities. I also promised that as we start to leave the 70s and enter the next couple decades, we'd see an explosion of cooperation. And what exploded in 70s and 80s culture? More than the arcade. In 1978, Atari released Fire Truck, the first co-op arcade game. Now, incidentally, there were some super obscure non-arcade co-op video games, like Moria on mainframe computers, and Maze Game on the Fairchild Channel F. They came before it to extremely limited audiences. Back to Fire Truck, 2 players operate the cabinet. One sitting in the driver's seat and controlling the gas and brakes, along with the front tires of a fire truck moving down the streets. And one standing behind at their own steering wheel, controlling the direction of the back of the truck. As is very common with arcade games, especially one-player or co-op ones, I classify this as a challenge rather than a competition game. Now, co-op video games will appear sporadically through the arcade era and into the home console era. Joust is a personal arcade favorite of mine, and its cooperation level is completely up to the players. You can knock each other out if you want, but you'll both have an easier time progressing if you don't. Some levels give a point bonus for cooperating, and some give a bonus for attacking each other. Either way, Joust is an endurance challenge game, not a competition, as are other early co-op video games, like the non-Super Mario Brothers and Rampage. One early arcade example of a cooperative competition would be Contra in 1985. Shoot level after level of bad guys, and eventually, with enough time and/or quarters, there is a victory condition. While there are certainly other early co-op competition games, and more of them as we enter the NES era, I'm going to turn more attention onto the non-digital space. We'll come back and check in here in another decade or two. Remember the dossiers from the 1930s? The ones where people are solving a mystery and using disconnected police reports and props? Well, half a century later, we see a spiritual successor in the Sherlock Holmes consulting detective game. Published in the early 80s, this gamifies collecting evidence, moving around London tracking down suspects, and interrogating people, with a lot more structure than the pile of stuff offered by the dossiers. Half choose your own adventure, and half deduction puzzle, Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective was a hit amongst the hobby crowd. So much so that it was the first cooperative game to win the prestigious Spiel des Jahres award. It counts more as a cooperative competition in my books than the dossiers as well, since you compare the speed of your case solving against what Sherlock himself was able to do. The fewer false leads you follow, the more questions about the case you're able to accurately answer, the better your score. From what I understand, beating Mr. Holmes is an almost impossibly high bar, but that's Sherlock for you, I guess. Now, this game could be played without any changes as a pure solo game. The cooperation comes in collaboratively discussing leads, scouring evidence, and debating where to go next. As the award jury for the Spiel des Jahres said, since the utmost precision is required to solve the cases, every word in newspaper reports or in the book of clues must be weighed with scrupulous care. Playing the game in a group demands intense concentration. Despite the game's success, its intricacy and specialness made it a tough act to follow, and we won't see much like this for a while. It's far harder to make one of these than to just write a regular mystery novel. This thread on the left of the timeline will lie dormant for a couple more decades. But storytelling in general wasn't dormant at all. RPGs continued to grow and grow into the 80s. The biggest deal in 80s tabletop games outside of the mass-market juggernauts like Trivial Pursuit and Pictionary. D&D may have been the behemoth, but there were so many more. Tunnels and Trolls, Traveler, RuneQuest, GURPS, Star Frontiers, the Warhammer RPG, Cyberpunk, the list goes on and on. Like I said last time, I don't really count these RPGs as co-op board games in themselves, but more like a close relative. Several of these RPGs would spawn spin-offs in other media, comics, video games, and, yes, board games. One board game in particular, 1987's Arkham Horror, was based on the Lovecraftian setting of the RPG Call of Cthulhu. It was designed to preserve the RPG's feel of everyone working together to fend off an extra-dimensional threat. According to the designer, Richard Launius, he loved the idea of the Call of Cthulhu RPG, but he was finding himself living far from most of his family and having difficulty finding time to spend with his night shift nurse wife while caring for 3 kids. So,
since this work and family environment was not conducive to role-playing games, I started thinking of how I could design the Cthulhu mythos into a board game that could be played solitaire or as a cooperative game, something I could play right after I got the kids in bed each night.
On your turn, roll dice to move your investigator around Arkham, encountering monsters, closing portals, performing RPG-like stat checks. Before each turn, there's a mythos phase where new monsters would appear and move around following simple patterns. Encountering monsters can cause combat and stat checks, potentially causing damage or death to the investigator characters. The philosophy behind the creation of Arkham Horror is quite unlike the 70s ideals of, we have to work together to save humanity. It was more like having the players take part in a movie or book. It really shows its RPG roots, and includes backstory documents, and includes flavor text on various item and event cards. Launius said,
I wanted the game to tell a story that unfolded with a player's actions. The fact that winning would occur less than 50% of the time, I wanted the story to drive the fun and make it an experience players remembered, less for winning or for losing, and more for certain events that occurred in the game. I don't believe there were any other games that focused on the story the way that Arkham Horror did when we first published.
On the whole, I believe this sense of drama and tension and story is a much more common driver for cooperative games of the last 40 years or so than education or persuasion to a point of view. Co-ops work great for those stories that just don't make sense as a fully competitive game. Besides Arkham Horror, you might remember the Harvest Time example from the last video where Jim Decove argued that if he tried to steal his neighbor's vegetable, he'd rightly be shot. Or Dawn of the Dead, where the players are banding together as the humans in a zombie movie. And we'll see plenty more examples later in the video too. While some games like this flourished in the one versus many space, Arkham Horror adapted it differently, not forcing anyone to be in the game master or villain role at all. Whether those ideas for the mythos phase came from solo board games, or being forced to play multiplayer games solitaire due to lack of opponent or something else, I'm not sure. But this is a very common model still seen today. There's also a small bit of competition within the game. For one, there are auctions on items that the players are expected to compete with each other in. Additionally, there's one player designated as more of a winner than the other. If the group wins, whoever closes the most gates is proclaimed the first citizen of Arkham and gets their name written in the Roll of Honor. But everyone does still win in that case. Shortly afterward, we have more playing around with the RPG format, with 1989's Hero Quest, designed by Stephen Baker, published by Games Workshop, partnered with Milton Bradley. Though sometimes referred to as a cooperative game, it's a one versus many game, in the vein of Escape from Colditz and Fury of Dracula. One person controls the evil wizard Zargon, while the others are generic fantasy characters, elf, dwarf, barbarian, or non-evil wizard, trying to complete some quest. Zargon's player also acts as a game master who has a map and a game book for the particular scenario. The non-Zargon players win if they meet the scenario's conditions and escape the dungeon without being killed. Some scenarios even provide equipment usable in future scenarios, campaign style. Games Workshop also released that same year Advanced Hero Quest, designed by Jervis Johnson, which was supposed to act as sort of a bridge between the toy store-friendly Hero Quest and the deeper Warhammer's Miniatures game. That one was more heavily influenced by RPGs and is apparently brutally punishing. And then, in 1995, Games Workshop took elements of both of these to fit in their Warhammer fantasy universe, making Warhammer Quest, designed by Andy Jones, which eliminates the need for a Game Master player, using random dungeon generation through cards. Fight monsters that you come across, get loot, and hopefully survive to carry that loot to the next session. The game does have some RPG-like elements, but more in the character progression and dungeon crawl sense, not in the dialogue and creativity sense. Warhammer Quest did come with Game Master rules, but apparently those were a shoehorned-in afterthought that no one much likes anyways. So while Hero Quest isn't a fully cooperative game, its descendant Warhammer Quest absolutely is. I wanted to highlight an interesting quote from Hero Quest designer Stephen Baker. He says that he didn't expect the game to be played with a fully cooperative spirit. The game is really aimed at 10 to 12-year-olds who play with their mums and dads. My feeling is that they play in a very competitive, rather than cooperative, way. Similarly, I've found comments about Arkham Horror suggesting that the game assumes players will try to play in ways to take the glory for themselves. Cooperation in board games is so foreign at this point that the assumption is that players on a team would not play on a team. This isn't an attitude I recall seeing in the last couple decades of tabletop co-ops. Sounds kind of Munchkin-y, really. But maybe the puzzly aspect of more modern games makes them impossible to win otherwise. Throughout the 90s, there were a handful of other lesser-known cooperative tabletop games. Most of what I found doesn't have much worth mentioning here, but one of the more novel uses of a virtual opponent is the Star Trek The Next Generation VCR game. There had been a number of VCR-based board games before this, but those were generally competitive games. Rather than following a certain step every round to control your adversary, you play along with a VHS where, at certain moments, some bad things happen to you, announced by an on-screen Klingon, because he's cheaper to pay than any of the primary Next Generation actors.
Nev! Who is moving now? Respond! Take the challenge of the Klingon sword to determine your destiny.
I'd say it's unpredictable, but it is the same tape, the same script every time, so I do wonder about replayability. I don't know, I've never tried it. But this is a predecessor for what we'd see in later years, an adversaries controlled by an app, or in one case, a CD.
As frustrating as a Ferengi. You may get assistance from these low-level computer defects, but I still maintain all computer control over navigation and weapon systems.
The more common example of a cooperative game in the 90s would be in video gaming. Online and LAN games were starting to develop as a technology, as well as couch co-op being possible as split screens became more feasible. Here's a few notable examples from this era: Descent, Doom, Sonic 2, sports games like Madden and NHL Hockey, and Diablo. A video game environment is an easy way to make an enemy or set of enemies follow some predefined or random behavior for a group of players to take on without having to involve someone else acting as the baddies, or making players follow some script or roll dice. That seemed to be the way the winds were blowing. You'd have to be completely divorced from the gaming scene in the late 90s to think that the future of strategic cooperative gaming was on the tabletop. That's where you play Monopoly and Scrabble, if you're normal. And if you're a certain type of nerd, D&D and Magic the Gathering. And for an even more narrow subset, there's this brand new European import called Eischiedler von Catan. It's pretty new. You probably haven't heard of it. It's like Monopoly on steroids! Entered Dr. Reiner Knizia. Knizia had been designing games since the late 1980s, with his first big hit, Modern Art, coming out in 1992. He's been an incredibly prolific designer throughout his whole career, into today. And if you've watched this far into this history, you've certainly played at least something of Knizia's. Lost Cities, Ingenious, Ra, Through the Desert, The Quest for El Dorado, Mlem, or any of about 800 others. So many truly legendary titles. In 1998, he was approached by a publisher who had the Lord of the Rings license and asked him to design something for them. Based on the book's story, the Doctor decided this would be best if all players worked together, as the hobbits needing to cooperate against Sauron and his forces. And in the year 2000, the game, simply titled The Lord of the Rings, was released to the world. There are some key features that The Lord of the Rings included that most strategic co-ops since 2000 have employed. It tells a story, but isn't a role-playing game. In The Lord of the Rings, you play as Frodo, Sam, Merry, Pippin, or Fatty? Fatty? Really? Anyway, play as one of them following the story beats from the book trilogy. You're not necessarily making choices in character, but you are progressing through story beats to some abstracted sense. Escalating tension and difficulty. The game has various challenge boards you go through to represent your journey. In each, the stakes get higher and the challenges get tougher. Asymmetric play. The characters have different specialties and powers that make certain actions make more sense for one player to execute than another. Puzzly feel with some randomness. Rather than figuring out a single solution to a preset puzzle, the game offers obstacles or resources in a non-fixed way. Much of this was also present in the other recent games I discussed, but this template was very solid throughout 21st century co-ops, as we'll see soon. Now, did Arkham Horror, or Warhammer Quest, or Sherlock Holmes, or RPGs, or some obscure pre-80s games give Knizia the template for this? Well, how he decided to approach this as a then very rare cooperative game is a mystery to me. I found this from a 2011 interview about developing The Lord of the Rings.
Most of my life is organized around exploring and developing new games. Playtesting is the lifeblood of game design. Therefore, we are playing every day. Funnily enough, with all this playtesting, there's literally no time left to play games. As a consequence, I really do not know many other games. You can have anything in life, but not everything. And now I will tell you a secret. Not knowing many other games is a big competitive advantage for me. Other game designers obviously cannot contain themselves and play many other games, claiming that it is important for market research. Of course, it is mainly for entertainment. By doing so, they spoil themselves with other people's ideas. I believe that the evolution of the human brain is not entirely geared towards game design. The design process requires a lot of decisions, small ones as well as big ones, how to handle and how to solve many of the tricky game situations. Now, the human brain has evolved to learn from experience. In game design, this means that if you already know the solution another designer has applied to a similar feature, the brain irresistibly meanders towards this solution. As I do not know this solution, my brain is free to develop my own innovative ideas.
This is something that Reiner Knizia has claimed in many interviews, that he doesn't ever play anyone else's games at all, just his own, and therefore everything comes from just his own thoughts, unsullied by the evolving world around him. Now, far be it from me to call one of the absolute greatest designers of all time a liar, but it's always smelled a little fishy to me. It just feels like a bit of disingenuous self-promotion. And even if it were true that Reiner himself literally somehow did not ever play another designer's game since 1990, that discredits the influence of playtesters, publishers, the audience, the rest of the world. This is absolutely a tangent, but everything is a remix. And when Knizia makes this claim, it sounds like he's positioning himself as the only true, pure creative force, and it's all the other people who are poisoning their mind with the ideas of others. Interestingly, Reiner partially contradicts himself in a different interview a decade later.
In the game world, it works that someone occasionally comes up with something unique and designs a game with it. No one can think of all new things, so authors use each other's ideas by putting their own spin on it and applying it in a different way to come up with new games. For example, I set the trend with Lord of the Rings, the first cooperative game, and Genius. At the moment, there is a trend in legacy games. I didn't start the trend, but I can follow it.
Besides the demonstrably false claim that The Lord of the Rings was the first cooperative game, he does note how he's sometimes following trends. Elsewhere in the interview, he talks about having played Dominion and made Quest of El Dorado following the deck building trend.
Gotcha.
Okay, enough villainizing one of the greatest designers of all time. Later in that 2011 interview is an intriguing quote about the mindset of a co-op game designer.
In The Lord of the Rings, the players are given a common task that they must achieve, and they realize very quickly that they are doomed. The players realize that the task is essentially unsurmountable, so competition and selfishness is replaced by a true spirit of togetherness against the common evil. The evil is me, or at least all the nasty obstacles I built into the game system to work against the players. In a cooperative game, like the Lord of the Rings board game, I, as the designer, become much more a part of the gameplay.
As someone who's designed a cooperative game, I definitely feel that last bit. The designer becomes a part of the gameplay. The designer has decided how mean they're going to be, how the monsters will attack, the path that prison guard will walk, the tempo at which the new threats are revealed. The designer is the game master, the overlord, the mastermind, the big bad villain. When you play Lord of the Rings, you're not just facing Sauron, you're facing Dr. Knizia. He could choose to be as kind or as cruel as he likes. If he makes things too easy on you, then it was a boring, meaningless victory. Too tough, and it's an impossible slog. No fun in that direction either. Just like you as a player can learn from a video game boss's patterns, the players begin to understand the tempo, the big threats, how to deal with those big threats, how to prepare and learn and overcome. But while your opponent in a non-cooperative game can learn and adapt as well, your co-op opponent is set in stone. Unless the game includes difficulty levels or different play modes, it is likely not going to feel as rewarding winning The Lord of the Rings the 5th, the 10th, the 20th time. So people make variants. They clamor for expansions. They play with different characters, or they just move on to something else. In 2000, there wasn't a lot of choice if this is the exact kind of experience you want. Knizia may not have invented the co-op, but the dungeon crawls and children's games don't really have the same feel. So what else can you play? Remember Jim Decove, who I mentioned last video as the designer of over 100 cooperative games since the 70s? He was asked in a 2005 interview if he'd ever played this Lord of the Rings game. Here's his response.
Yes, I own the game and its expansions. I've played it many times with the family in our game group and also at game conferences. My only peeve is Reiner's, or perhaps his publisher's, competitive variation added at the end of the rules, suggesting that if the cooperative version was a good enough play, then here's a better way to play. I followed closely the running debate in such magazines as Counter about whether it was a game at all. I had a big chuckle when one reviewer chastised the gamers for, on the one hand, claiming that they didn't play games for blood, but rather for the social experience. But when Reiner served up a wonderful social experience, they, on the other hand, said it was hardly a game at all, and in time would be broken once the winning solution was found. Of course, like any game, certain strategies will enhance chances of winning the game, but if it is well designed, and Reiner's game is, it will yield a lifetime of play and no one solution, rendering it unplayable.
I personally think it's wonderful that Jim had not only heard of that game, but knew and appreciated it. Two completely different worlds of game design, one focused on the emotional and educational, one on the strategic and narrative, decades apart. And I had falsely guessed one would never have even heard of the other. Great stuff. It took quite a few years for the shockwaves of The Lord of the Rings to really be felt. In fact, one of the first post-Rings co-ops was the 2005 remake of 1987's Arkham Horror. Modernized after almost 2 decades of progress, it was far removed from the 80s aesthetic and had that mid-aughts Fantasy Flight gloss. Replace all the amateurish illustration with full-color painterly beauties. Get rid of the roll and move randomness and replace it with heaps of complex rules. But keep in a story-focused experience with a feeling of overwhelming dread and the necessity of teamwork, and you've got a hit, a revitalized classic. This second edition had a much wider reach than the original, and its popularity helped solidify cooperative games as a genre. In contemporary reviews of Arkham Horror 05, the 2 most common touchpoints are The Lord of the Rings and Shadows over Camelot. Also released in 2005, Shadows over Camelot is actually of a different lineage than I've been skipping over here. The Traitor game, or more generically, the Hidden Teams game. The Traitor game genre dates back to the mid-80s, when Mafia, also known as Werewolf, first hit the scene. Everyone on the surface pretends to be part of the same team, the good guys, but a small minority of players, sometimes just one, will secretly undermine their efforts. In Mafia, most players will close their eyes during a night phase, during which the bad guy or guys will eliminate one of the good guys. During the day phase, the remaining players are trying to figure out who among them are the traitors. This generally involves some mix of strategy and social deduction, figuring out who's lying and hiding stuff just by talking, deducing from language and mannerisms what someone actually believes. There are countless variants, some boxed versions, many just from word of mouth with no official components, and eventually, some international television franchises. Spin-offs of Mafia and Werewolf started to get big in the mid-2000s, with a whole host of these. After a printed Werewolf variant, Werewolves of Miller's Hollow, made it big in 2001, a fire hose was turned on. We see Bang in 2002, Saboteur in 2004, Shadowhunters 2005. Betrayal at House on the Hill often gets put here, but there's no social deduction, just a randomly decided traitor that's immediately made public once determined. It's just a one versus many game, where the one is revealed after several turns have already been played. While these games all involve teamwork, and sometimes a superficial fake full cooperation, these games aren't cooperative games. They have conflict between players. Usually. Shadows over Camelot is a sorta cooperative game with an Arthurian theme. The players have to work together to complete certain quests, and are forced to do some mixture of beneficial and harmful actions in the process. If the team earns more white swords than black swords, then the knights all win. But everyone is dealt a secret loyalty card at the beginning, which may tell one player that they're working to earn more black than white, and then only that player wins. I say may, because unusual to most traitor games before or since, there is no guarantee that the traitor card will be dealt out. It may happen that everyone really is working together, and any distrust is unearned. In that case, the game balance often tips toward too easy. But is Shadows over Camelot a cooperative game? Well, sometimes. And no faithful player actually knows 100% whether that's the case until the game state is being resolved after everyone is done playing. It usually is a one versus many game. It's just not public information who the one is. They don't have different rules to play by, if there even is one. This traitor genre would have several more years in the spotlight, peaking with Battlestar Galactica in 2008 and The Resistance in 2009. In the following decades, there were some big hits like Two Rooms and a Boom, Dead of Winter, Spyfall, Secret Hitler, Nemesis. It's still around as a mechanism, but outside of the odd hit like Blood on the Clock Tower, its heyday is now in the past. While these have a resemblance to co-ops, they are their own thing, and outside the purview of what I'm generally really interested in here. In the majority of these, the core gameplay is about deduction, rather than what some would call pure strategy. Although the ratio of how social the deduction is varies greatly from title to title. So, excluding remakes and traitor games, what was the next big co-op after Lord of the Rings? Going by games with over 1,000 ratings on BoardGameGeek. First, you get the 2002 party game Cranium Hoopla, a spin-off of the hugely popular team-based party game, where everyone is on a single team racing a timer. It was originally sold only at Starbucks, and incidentally, I believe the first cooperative tabletop game I ever played, back in 2008. Next up, Rory's Story Cubes in 2005, which is really mostly marketed as a storytelling activity. And then Who Was It in 2007, an electronic talking memory and deduction game for children, designed by, Reiner Knizia. Hoopla and Rory's Story Cubes are bona fide hits, both of which have had new additions in the last couple of years, but they're not really of the same strategy lineage as the Lord of the Rings. The next games that Lord of the Rings might have inspired wouldn't come until 8 years after it came out, in a wave of several cooperative games that would really solidify the genre. Pandemic, Space Alert, Red November, Ghost Stories, A Touch of Evil, all 2008, and most of them still quite respected today. Sorry, Red November. They all have their own flavor, but the most impactful is Pandemic, so let's start there. In Pandemic, designed by Matt Leacock, the players are working together to eradicate diseases from the world, our real world. Much like in Rings, each player takes on a different role that has mostly the same capabilities as each other, but with some unique ability. Players are traveling all around the map, playing cards that let them remove disease cubes, communicating together to figure out what to do as a team. The game isn't following a scripted narrative in the same way as Rings, but there certainly is a strong mechanical narrative. Disease spreads fast if left unchecked, so players work to quell outbreaks and use their limited capability wisely. There's a super clever mechanism where infected cities are the most likely to get hit again, so the chances of disaster remain high, therefore so does the tension. Players maintain hidden hands, but the rulebook allows players to say anything about what cards they have, so to save time, some play groups will just have their hands face up on the table. But even back then, in these early days of this style of cooperative game, people were finding that the more information the players give each other, the more susceptible the game is to being taken over by a single player. One experienced player, or a player who's quick at processing a game state, or, just someone who's loud, can work out a good plan using the public information provided and tell the other players what they should do. This leads to the classic conundrum of the quarterback, or alpha gamer, or steamroller, or whatever you want to call it. The more open information and puzzly the game is, the more susceptible the game is to quarterback. Not every playgroup is going to encounter this, but enough of them do that it's a widespread design problem. I recently got to talk with Matteo Menapace, who worked with Matt Leacock on the 2023 game Daybreak. He's also served as the designer in residence at London's V&A and has held lectures at various universities speaking about the power of cooperative games. I asked him his thoughts on this problem, as a designer who's thought a lot about cooperative games.
The alpha player problem is, in my understanding, when one player typically the one that brought the game to the table, that knows the game already, is, let's say, very eager to do the right thing, and in doing so, maybe oversteps what might be a hidden rule of giving everyone enough agency over their turn or whatever their moves. So I don't necessarily see it as a problem as such, because I mean, or at least it starts from a good place. Like, I feel that it's not that it's people who don't want others to have a fun experience, but at least in my whenever I had that experience of an alpha player, it wasn't that someone was trying to play the game for me or didn't want me to have fun, but rather it was someone who was, as I said, very eager to have to win to win the game. As a designer, you could think that if this is happening in a way that is not just the odd player, but that happens over and over, you can also try to design that behavior out of the game, potentially. Not necessarily completely, but try to prevent it from being an issue for other players.
I've posted our full discussion, including his history of interest in cooperative games and some more background about Daybreak, on the channel here, so please check it out. So, Pandemic suffers from the quarterbacking problem, and so does Antoine Bauza's Ghost Stories, which is a more difficult, highly punishing co-op themed around Chinese mythology. Ghosts keep coming onto the tiles of the board, and players roll dice to exorcise them. The tiles of the board, when not haunted, can provide positive abilities, such as giving tokens that can replace die roll results or trap ghosts. While there's uncertainty from randomness, there isn't any information hidden between players. Likewise, Red November, themed around Russian gnomes piloting a submarine, also doesn't do anything beyond heavy randomness to stop someone from orchestrating the group. And there's also A Touch of Evil, a horror-themed board game that can be played either competitively or cooperatively. The cooperative mode has been compared to a lighter, easier Arkham Horror, and again, has only heavy randomness as a mechanical defense against quarterbacking. It does encourage players to role-play a bit and make in-character choices, which may also help stop that quarterbacking a bit, depending on the group. But some designers did find quarterbacking to be a design problem to solve. One of them is my personal design hero, Czech designer Vlada Kvatil.
Why must I hold you only whilst I dream? Will I be forever enslaved by your spell? Why must I worship you and never ever tell?
In 2008, he was best known for the deep civilization builder Through the Ages and the wacky but punishing Galaxy Trucker. Both 10 out of 10 games, by the way. He had made a cooperative mode in an expansion for the fantasy adventure game Prophecy in 2003, although that wouldn't reach the English-speaking world until 2009. Vlada's first purely cooperative release was Space Alert, which casts the players as crew members aboard a spaceship trying to survive for 10 minutes in a dangerous area before jumping to hyperspace. And by 10 minutes, I mean 10 minutes. The game is played to an audio track provided in the box in the form of a CD. While the CD is playing, the players are plotting out their actions via cards that have arrows and buttons that show where they're going and what they're activating on the ship. At various times, new threats will be announced, which have some predefined actions. There are also moments like
data transfer,
which lets people trade cards around, and
communication system down.
I don't know if it was inspired by the VCR game from a decade or two prior, but it is in that vein. As CD players have become more rare in daily life, there have been websites and apps that have new audio tracks, including some procedurally generated ones, offering much more variety than a single 1-hour videotape of a Klingon. I'm still going to put that connection in the timeline just in case. With just 10 minutes and constantly added information, there just isn't time for one player to manage how 4 players can move their characters around the ship. They have to manage shared resources wisely, make sure that all threats are managed well enough, and try to stop using the lift at the same turn as me, Steve. Space Alert could have been made without the timer and soundtrack, but by adding that, this was among the first co-op games to deliberately skirt the quarterbacking issue. After this 2008 wave, the floodgates really opened up to a host of new co-op games, spanning multiple genres. At this point, trying to go over every big name is a fool's errand. So what I'm going to do instead is focus in on that quarterbacking problem and how different games have tried to address it. Now, plenty of games have not bothered to address it at all. It's truly only a problem in some groups, and so these games just aren't for them. And when a family is gathered around a table for Forbidden Island or Castle Panic, it may be for the best if an adult is able to help out the kids with their turns. And I mean, last year's Fate of the Fellowship sure hasn't suffered in popularity for it, so it's a perfectly viable option. But let's dig into what approaches designers have taken. So, as mentioned, one of the ways to get around it is some sort of timer. Some have done it in ways very similar to Space Alert, even down to the audio track, such as Space Team, Hey Yo, Sink or Swim, and Fuse. Everyone has to play their part of the game at the same time. So while there's room for some collaboration, there just can't be a total takeover by one player. Or you can go the route of Daybreak and have player turns happen simultaneously, although not on any sort of hard and fast timer.
I think removing the turns or not having turns, because actually we never had turns. It was something that we introduced from the very first prototype. This idea of not having individual player turns was possibly the thing that prevented alpha player, the main factor for preventing alpha player from emerging. The other thing was also that if players have enough agency on their own, it's less likely that the alpha player behavior would emerge. So if as a player you have a special action or something that only you can do, then it is still possible, but it's, I think, less likely that someone else might tell you what to do.
Another rather direct way of accomplishing this is by setting firm restrictions in the rules about how and when to communicate. This generally makes the game completely revolve around that restricted communication. One big example is Hanabi by Ghost Stories designer Antoine Bauza. The game is all about hidden information and giving clever clues. The players are holding their hands of cards in such a way that they can't see what they're holding, but can see everyone else's hand. The players are aiming to play cards with colors and numbers on them in a proper order, and someone's turn either consists of playing a card from their hand, one they can't see, remember, or giving a clue to someone else about what kinds of cards they hold. No communication of any sort is allowed outside of the very specific types of clues you're allowed to give. The game would be trivial and no fun at all if the players could openly communicate. Even more restrictive, some games allow no communication of any sort. Take Wolfgang Warsch's The Mind, which is another game where a group is trying to play cards in order in a shared pile. You can only see your own hand, you can't say any words at all, you can't give any clues of any sort, verbally or non-verbally. It's all about sensing the timing vibe. Other popular examples include Mysterium, The Crew, the Lord of the Rings trick-taking games, Magic Maze, Sky Team, Bomb Busters, and Then We Held Hands, which puts its communication rule like this. While playing the game, the players may not discuss the game itself. However, they must consider each other's available cards and potential moves. They must cooperate by reading each other's intentions and by trying to help each other avoid being stuck, which would cause the game to be lost. the players may discuss anything else while playing the game. For example, taking the opportunity to talk about something important, or to just pass the time and enjoy each other's company.
Well, first, if I play this content card,
Nope.
and then you could play
Nope,
the ambivalent.
you can't say that.
But then if you played
You
this,
can't.
then
You can't say that.
I could do
There
the
are
carefree,
rules.
and then
Stop it. Stop it.
I'm
Stop.
gonna play the anger card next if you don't knock it off. Ugh.
Many cooperative party games go this route as well, especially when it comes to clue-giving games. An evolution of the 80s and 90s team party games like Taboo and Catchphrase, or even of parlor games like Celebrities. The co-op games Just One and So Clover both involve making other people guess certain words just by writing other words on a dry erase board and not allowing any other communication. The aforementioned Cranium Hoopla, plus Codenames Duet, Mystic Paths, Gibberers, and others also have strict clue-giving rules that severely limit your vocabulary options. Games like this, made before the 2010s, would have almost certainly been team games rather than cooperative ones. But they work great in this format. Hoopla and Codenames Duet, in fact, are perfect examples of the inverse, a teams game becoming a cooperative one. Hoopla was way ahead of the curve there. Rather than comparing your score to how the opponent does, you compare it against a table in most of these games.
Now that's talent. Good prize. You all did great. Hope to see you again next year.
Well, who won? I think that your rating system is questionable.
Can definitely be a morale booster to just be told in whatever way, you did good, and never have to tell a group of non-gamers that they lost, and potentially lose that audience. It does raise the question, what counts as a win? It's really not explicitly clear, and very few groups are going to be formal about it. It would be wild to sit down for a little family game of Wavelength and say, and remember kids, only the maximum score range counts as a victory.
Yeah, we know, Dad.
This fuzziness between what's winning and losing kinda teeters into one of the other categories, but I'm still going to count them as cooperative competition titles. A weaker version of this communication restriction is employed by games like Beasts and The Game, and the not actually cooperative Battlestar Galactica, where you can hint at the cards in your hand, but not outright say or show it. Depending on the rule set, it gets into gray areas of what's okay to share. The designers don't want you to be completely secretive, but they also don't want it to be outright solvable by a player. With this gray, have your cake and eat it too area, it can get easy to distort this into coming up with some established conventions where I can help moderately with red means I have a 3-value red card. Gets into a spirit of the rules versus letter of the law situation. I generally don't like it. I do love one of the explicitly allowed phrases in Beasts, though. This play will ruin this place. Beautiful. Alright, let's try a softer touch. How about, rather than setting rules about giving out hidden information, the game design is such that players don't want to just plan out in the open. That works best in games that aren't strictly cooperative. We've already talked about hidden team games and one versus many games, which accomplish this rather well. There are also games, sometimes referred to as semi-co-ops, where there's a shared loss condition, but everyone has an individual victory condition. Take Dead of Winter, for example. In order for the group as a whole to not lose, you all have to survive in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. But everyone has some further goals, such as accumulating certain items, protecting certain NPCs, and so on. The advice that one person may give may not actually be to the whole group's benefit, but actually just advances their own secret goals. People who debate terminology love to argue whether Dead of Winter, Nemesis, Cutthroat Caverns, Legendary count as cooperative, or if there's a difference between a group loss and a tie, or if there's a difference between there being one winner and a bunch of losers, versus one grand winner among a bunch of lesser ordinary winners, like in the original Arkham Horror. In my estimation, a game where there's no way for everyone to win at once is a relative of the cooperative game, but doesn't strictly belong to the category. It's a competitive game with an everyone loses state. This can also occur in games that are not billed as being cooperative in any way, from zombie flux to chaos in the old world to nuclear war. Another quarterbacking tactic: make the game just so dang complex that one person couldn't possibly try to micromanage every aspect of it. Mage Knight, Spirit Island, Too Many Bones, and the aforementioned Daybreak are some examples people offer for this. There's just too much going on for a quarterback to actually process, with so many individual player abilities and a wide possibility space that it just wouldn't make sense. This works for most groups. In some situations, though, this can just make it worse. If there's one player who's less confident or less engaged, that player is primed for a takeover. I'm having a difficult time processing a complex situation, so why not just let the steamroller walk all over me? They clearly know better than I do. I'll just sit here as a dummy player and let this other person handle my seat better than I possibly could.
Okay, so the game is called Codenames.
I don't know.
What don't you know?
I don't know. I don't get it.
Okay, well, I haven't started explaining the rules yet.
Speaking of Daybreak, I'd be remiss to omit the indirect connection back to the 70s games like Save the Whales, which are intended to educate and influence behavior on how to help the world. Much like Save the Whales' manual contains educational material in support of your in-game actions, Daybreak's cards include QR codes bringing you to pages on the Daybreak site, showing the real-world impact of these actions and crises. Menapace calls the game playful activism. The majority of modern cooperative strategy games aren't intended to convey a viewpoint, any more than the implicit bias found in any work. So it's fun to see this link made after 40 plus years. Spirit Island's anti-colonialist message also gets a nod here, though it's less hit you over the head with it than Daybreak. Back to quarterbacking. Finally, one that only works for a small fraction of games. Using real-world skills within a game beyond pure strategy. Take the game What Next, for example. It's kind of a choose-your-own-adventure, story-driven game. To check your success or failure at certain story points, players sometimes have to execute some physical challenge. They could be tossing or catching cards, stacking game pieces, flicking pucks. It's as if Beat the Clock were alive and with us today, except with a narrative built around it. One player is using actual dexterity to accomplish a task, so there's only so much instruction someone could give there. Space Cadets is somewhat similar. The game involves a number of interconnected mini-games that come together to simulate the work of a starship crew, flying through space, collecting samples, firing lasers at enemies, and so on. These mini-games involve playing memory games, identifying cardboard shapes by their feel, and again, flicking pucks, in addition to some more traditional board gamey challenges. Getting a bit into party game territory, you can, theoretically, expand this to knowing trivia facts, performing charades, balancing items, anything where one player may have a real-world advantage in the group, and therefore be chosen to execute a challenge that's not just strategic. This clearly isn't a fits-all solution that can be bolted onto an otherwise quarterback-y design, but it's neat in the right context. The other sort of solution I can think of is a game that promotes narrative over strategy. We've touched on a few of those. RPGs have that in spades, of course. Certain playgroups will play games I've mentioned before, such as Arkham Horror, A Touch of Evil, and others, kind of RPG-like in character. They'll make the choices their character would make, rather than necessarily the optimal solution. Other playgroups will never do that and would recoil in horror at the thought of deliberately playing suboptimally. That's me, I'm in that latter camp there. I just can't bring myself to approach a strategy game that way. I'll count that as a personal failing. Over the course of the 2010s and into the 2020s, co-ops in many forms grew heavily in popularity. And not just in the board games as I've talked about. Couch co-op video games had some notable releases in this time, such as in Portal 2, It Takes Two, Trine, and the new Super Mario Bros. Games. The 2010s also saw the proliferation of escape rooms, a cooperative experience in meat space. That then inspired escape room tabletop experiences like Exit and Unlock. They're certainly not replayable like classic board games are, but they occupy largely the same space. In fact, the boxed escape room puzzles aren't miles away from the 1930s dossier games. The 2010s also saw co-ops interacting with other trends of the time, especially campaign games and legacy games. Legacy games are those that change the game permanently after each play, and campaign games are those where you play through some scripted series of game scenarios. One wildly popular set of co-op games using these structures is the Pandemic Legacy series, updating the classic Pandemic into 3 different game seasons from 2015 to 2020. And they were extremely well received. The first one, currently a decade old, is still sitting at number 3 on the Board Game Geek rankings. Gloomhaven is another wildly popular cooperative game, and it's a heavy one, both in complexity and in pounds. Going through a dungeon crawl campaign storyline, with each player controlling a character who levels up their deck over time. That one, number 4 on Board Game Geek, with 2 spin-offs, Frosthaven and Jaws of the Lion, also sitting in the top 25. Moving into the current decade, the 2020s, there are a few notable trends popularizing some things that began in the 10s. 1. Some tabletop co-ops have become app-driven, allowing for a more complex opponent or narrative than one scripted on paper. Forgotten Waters, for instance, uses an app to handle a lot of hassle that could have otherwise been dealt with in some flowchart-heavy book, or by making it more RPG-like and giving game decisions to a game master. By freeing up players from manually tracking certain parts of game state, they can focus more on strategic and narrative decisions, and less on bookkeeping. Another trend, boss battle games. Plays of Leviathan Wilds, Slay the Spire, and Oathsworn grant variety from play to play by introducing new big bads for each session, which have their own scripted behavior and sometimes card decks defining their actions. You can throw in my own design, Aetherspire, for some good self-promotion too. Kids' cooperative games are a much more common sight now as well. Walking into a toy store, you may see shelves of Peaceable Kingdom games, for example. Following in the footsteps of family pastimes, Peaceable Kingdoms makes exclusively cooperative games, mostly for kids aged 3 to 8, strongly promoting teamwork, communication, and empathy. My kids, born in the 2010s, certainly enjoyed many a play of Hoot Owl Hoot, Mermaid Island, Sky Magic, and Cauldron Quest. And while I can't imagine a group of only adults playing these games, they are designed to be interesting enough for the entire family to play together. Kids game giant Haba also produces games like Orchard, Hannah Honeybee, and Unicorn Glitterluck, or in the original German, Einhorn Glitzerglück, which is so much fun to say. Not quite so much fun to play, but I haven't been in the game's target demographic since the George H.W. Bush administration, so there is that. These were absolutely great as a way to enjoy time with my kids, though, and even though they've never been sore losers, it was nice to have something to celebrate together over. Something where I didn't have to artificially hold back. Finally, less a mechanical trend and more of a cultural one. The awards establishment only recently started granting cooperative games the big awards. The Spiel des Jahres, which I mentioned being awarded to the Sherlock Holmes game in the 80s, otherwise hadn't awarded one to a co-op game until 2021, when hidden picture finding game Micro Macro took home the main prize. Since then, 2 others have won both communication limiting strategy games, Sky Team and Bomb Busters. Others, like Daybreak and The Crew, have won the related Kennerspiel des Jahres, awarded to more complex titles. Looking at other awards, it definitely seems to have an uptick since around 2015, where games from Mysterium to Pandemic Legacy to The Crew to The Mind were getting awards like the Golden Ace, Deutscher Spielepreis, Golden Geek Strategy Game of the Year, and the American Tabletop Awards, when none before had done so, except in certain cases the Sherlock Holmes game. Pandemic and The Lord of the Rings and Forbidden Island did get accolades for sure, but usually in side categories like Most Innovative or Best for Families, or sometimes this separate category just for cooperative games. But now we're seeing them compete, just like competitive games. Where will we go next with co-op games? Matteo Menapace suggested it might involve more games where communication is done primarily via in-game actions.
So I think the design space that is open for cooperative games to explore is exactly that. How much of the game happens, or how much of the communication between players happens through the game, as you say, and how much of it happens through open verbal communication or otherwise.
From a barely codified activity, to a countercultural statement, to an educational tool, to some of the most popular games on the market, cooperative games have undergone a huge transformation. It's hard to predict what will come next, but it certainly is a widely popular, widely accepted phenomenon at this point, especially among hobbyists. As I write this, 24 of the top 100 games in the Board Game Geek rankings are cooperative. In the mass market world, it's still growing. In the Amazon best-selling board game list, as I write this, it's not until number 34 on the list that you get something that even has cooperative rules, wavelength, and the default rules for that are competitive. Lots of the world may still think there's no point in a game that doesn't involve beating another person. But that's changing. And I'm excited to see what new advances are coming down the pipe. In a time where many people can't fathom ever cooperating with anyone, gleefully hurting themselves so that others can also be hurt, I'm glad there is still such a place where people are rewarded for setting aside their egos, celebrating each other's strengths, and solving problems that impact us all. We can only hope that somehow, someday, this expands beyond the tabletop. Until then, thanks for visiting. I'll see you again soon in my stock photo of a den.